Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois, and we have got a great show for you today. Peonies? Peonies? We're going to be talking about this favorite spring blooming plant, which has its own variation of names like tomato, tomato, potato, potato. But you know, I'm not doing this by myself. I am joined, as always, every single week by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. I think it's Peony.
Peony.
That's the way I've always said it anyway.
That's how I've done it as well. The peony, the peony. You're going to hear all different ways to pronounce this plant today. So yeah, feel free to put your own phonetical twist on this plant in the comments below. Oh, well, Ken, I do have to say, sort of related to peonies, that it has been very dry and now it is very wet. It has rained a lot and all of the peonies are just completely flopped over in my yard. Like, what the heck just happened? We got a downpour last night. How about you? Did you get some good rain?
Yeah, last saw we got about an inch, and I haven't checked. I didn't check the peonies in our yard, but driving the kids to school, there's a lot of, I'll say flattened, but a lot of peonies where the flowers are much closer to the ground than they were the day before.
And usually they rebound somewhat. But sometimes, you know, those flowers, they're pretty big. They kind of just almost as naturally will droop towards the ground. So I guess we'll talk about all of that today.
Yes, I think especially we'll get into flower forms like the doubles. I think those hold a lot of water too, and that just down they go.
Yes, yes. Well, there's a lot of history when it comes to the peony, and I think it's going to be mentioned throughout today's show. You know, these different ways that this plant has impacted our history. But you know, looking at some of the different dates and how long have humans been cultivating this plant, it's at least 3,000 years that we have been cultivating the garden peony. And when we talk about peonies, for the most part, there's different species out there, but for the most part, we are talking about the Peonia lactiflora. It's also known as the Chinese peony, the garden peony, the common peony. So there's essentially, this is what we're all growing in our yards for the most part. There's going to be definitely variations here, but the most common one out there is Peonia lactiflora. And that is the one that, they said, at least in Asian culture, they can trace that back at least 3,000 years in historical documentation. So it's been around for a while. And it's been in people's yards for quite a while too. And it kind of moved its way from Asia. There's also European species as well, but a lot of German immigrants seem to bring this particular plant over to the North Americas. And at least in Western Illinois, where we're located, there's a lot of German heritage folks here. And it seems like everyone has a peony in their yard that at some point in time. So I have my own peony in my yard. I didn't plant it. It was there. So do you have plenty of peonies in your yard, Ken?
Yes, our neighbor has a line, I guess, on the property line. I'm not sure who they actually belong to, if they're ours or theirs or split. And I actually have one or two that I dug from my grandparents' house when we sold their house. So those, I don't know how old those are. I remember them. I think they've been around as long as I've been alive. So,
and like there's just so much diversity. There's like from color to flower shape, even leaf shape changes up. As we mentioned, we do have the common peony, which is a non-native, but we do have two native species of peony in North America, but really nothing east of the Rocky Mountains. The two native species are more Western species that you might find growing in anywhere from like California up to Oregon, another species up in Washington, Idaho, maybe Montana, places like that. But for the most part, we do not have any native peony species, at least regionally here in the Midwest. It's all cultivated species from Asia, Europe, other side of the planet.
Yeah, I think there's something like 30 some species, depending on what taxonomy you read. It's somewhere between 20 and 50 some species. I think 30-ish is usually what's agreed upon. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot of different types, and you can get straight species peonies. I think it's a little more of a specialized market, a little more hardcore people growing those. Like you said, yeah, it's usually the lactiflora or hybrids for the herbaceous peonies that we're going to be growing.
Mhm. Yeah.
So there's also the tree peonies, which aren't really trees; they're more shrubs. They are perennial woody stems. So with those, they don't flopping isn't as big of an issue. And there's a lot of times they'll have much larger flowers, wider range of flower colors. You can get into yellows and stuff with the tree peonies. I think I've never grown them because these are much more expensive than the herbaceous types. And then there's the intersectional or Ito peonies, which are a cross between herbaceous and tree peonies. So they have the foliage of a tree peony, which is it's got lobes and stuff in it. It's not just
Mhm.
your oval type that we have for herbaceous. So a little more interesting looking foliage, in my opinion. So the intersectional has the foliage of our tree peonies, but it's not woody. It's going to die back to the ground. And again, it's got a little more flower color available in that. And I think those bloom a little bit later than the herbaceous. I think, if I remember right, tree peonies are blooming than the herbaceous types, and then the intersectionals after that. And even in the herbaceous, you've got different bloom times within there for that.
Mhm. I've never been able to get my head wrapped around tree peonies or even hydrangeas that are trained as trees. I'm just like, whoa, slow down. I can't keep up. I got to stick with my regular old herbaceous peony or my regular old shrub hydrangea. I'm like, let's not turn these things into trees. Oh, so yeah, the options just overfull. They overload my brain a little bit. Um, but the options are definitely out there. I mean, this is such a popular plant. I guess I didn't really realize how common this plant was, or peony, when it comes to like cut flower arrangement. There was a lot of the literature that I had found. It was just, this is how you grow peonies for cut flowers, and they don't worry about plants drooping down or staking plants or anything like that because they're cutting off all the flowers. And so um, the I was just surprised. And now that I go and I think about the floral arrangements, like, oh yeah, there's peonies in there. Um, and then the production is worldwide. It is global. The biggest issue with peony is that it's you can't get this to bloom all year long. So you have to go to different parts of the planet throughout the year to then grow, cultivate these, harvest them, and then ship them to, planet wide, to fulfill that demand for peony blooms in bouquets. And I think the primary thing is, one, they're beautiful, and also two, they smell wonderful. And so like it's a big demand for cut flowers. And so North Carolina state, they have a lot more information on this. They have one of the biggest peony farms in the country is going to be in North Carolina, and so their extension or their university has more information online if people are interested in looking that up. And they did a survey and they found that peony is the second most commonly grown cut flower in the U.S. Now, this is commonly grown. So, like, if you're a cut flower grower, you probably have a couple peonies somewhere on the farm that you'll harvest sometime throughout the year. So, it's not economic importance. It's just, you can find it on a lot of cut flower farms. Um, and if you want to know, I said second for peony. What's the most popular? Zinnia. The most commonly grown cut flower is zinnia.
Yeah, so common as in everybody grows them type thing. Not
Everybody grows them. Doesn't necessarily mean they make the most money. Like they don't have the biggest economic impact, but you will find them at almost every cut flower farm.
yeah, I think that's I don't know. Peonies, well, picking your favorite flowers like picking your favorite kid. It kind of depends on the day. Um,
Hmm.
but like peonies, when they're in bloom, that's probably one of my favorite flowers. problem is they don't bloom very long. So you got a short window to
Yes.
enjoy them.
Yes. And that's the big issue with cut flowers is they they last what, 4 or 5 days maybe,
Yeah, a
before they
week or
really
so. Yeah.
yeah, they start to fade, and then this just kind of becomes very um lackluster pretty quickly as the petals and everything just sort of begin to fall off and droop off there. So um but the benefit to peonies and why they can grow them around the world and ship them is that if you get them before the bloom opens, they store really well. Like they can store for weeks at a time in a refrigerated setting. If you cut them, at the right stage of their flower development, um, it's when you then initiate that flower to then open. You've only got a very short window in a floral arrangement for that peony to do its thing. And usually it's a main centerpiece because the flowers can be, saucer shaped, sized plants.
Mhm. Yeah, so we teased it. Maybe we should talk about cut flowers.
I guess we
You're cutting
should.
them.
We keep talking about it. Yeah.
So, so if you've got peonies in your landscape and you want to enjoy them for more than a couple weeks, so when those flower buds start or developing, once those sepals, the outer green wrapping on the leaves, once or on the flower buds, once that starts opening up and you can start seeing the color of the petals beneath. So in my case, we've got white flowered peonies in our yards. Once I start seeing that white, you kind of softly squeeze those flower buds, and they should have like I guess the consistency or the feel of like a marshmallow. Called the marshmallow stage. That's when
Hmm.
you want to cut those. You put them in chilled water. From what I've read, I don't do this. I just let them grow on the plant, but put them in chilled water for an hour or two, and then you can put them in the refrigerator, and they can last 3, 4+ weeks in that refrigerated setting, in that marshmallow stage. Put them out, take them out, warm them up, and they'll open up and bloom for you. You may lose a day or so for the when the flowers open on the lifespan. So instead of 5, 6, 7 days, you may lose a day off that, but you're getting those weeks later than you normally would off that particular cultivar that you'd be harvesting from.
I this is the time of year that you would be going out inspecting those flower buds, squeezing them. Do they feel like a marshmallow or not? If they do, you'd cut them and you'd bring them inside, throw them in a vase, throw them in the fridge. However you would want to display them, or whenever, if you want to delay it, like Ken had described. And yeah, it's that season right now. And I remember the Illinois Veterans Home in Quincy. They have a memorial garden down there that our master gardeners work at, and it's arranged very symmetrically. So there's like this main axis as you walk into the garden, and then on either side there's these secondary axes. Um, then to go either to your left or to your right, and between these two pathways on either side is just this row of different types of peonies. I'll see if I can find a picture to throw in here. It's enchanting. You walk through there, it smells amazing. The colors, the flowers are just beautiful. So I'm pretty sure I have a picture I can send you, Ken. I think I used it on the cover of one of our events that we did.
Good deal. And yeah, I guess so. And talking of blooming, you mentioned this earlier. We've got with our herbaceous. So I think today we're focusing on herbaceous.
Hmm.
Um, Ito and tree peonies are a show for a different day. Have somebody who actually has grown those. Talk about those.
Yes.
But with our herbaceous types, we've got early bloomers, mid season, and late season. So if you're looking at a catalog, a lot of times they're going to be categorized by bloom season. So, and despite only maybe blooming for a week or two for the cultivar, if you get different cultivars and stuff, you can extend that bloom season or that season where you have peony blooms in your landscape if you mix and match those blooming periods with that. And you know, say any garden catalog that's selling peonies is gonna should have that information.
Hmm.
And I know there's companies or nurseries that specialize only in peonies, and they've got catalogs, and some of the prices may want to make you cry when you look at them, especially for like the newer introductions and stuff. But But yeah, and I think when you think of how long these plants can survive, the amount of money you spend may seem like a lot, but it's not uncommon. You always read about, it's not uncommon to hear of plants living for 100 years.
Hmm.
So it's a long-term investment when you're buying those really expensive ones.
Yes. If you're into collecting different types of plants, I, this is definitely a rabbit hole to fall into right here. I was on the American Peony Society website too, just looking at pictures of different types that are registered with them. There's some wild looking ones out there. Um, Again, I don't know how you might find them. Again, you'd have to go to those specialty nurseries or join the American Peony Society. I think they have their annual show,
It's coming up.
and it's coming up. Was it in Wisconsin? I saw, or there's some event going on in Wisconsin, peony related. I don't know if it's their annual national meeting.
Uh, yes, June 11th through the 15th, Beaver Dam, Wisconsin for
There you go.
2025.
We'll head up to Wisconsin because if you have permission from some of the people showcasing these flowers, a lot of times you can collect the pollen from these, and but we'll get into that here in a little bit when we talk about breeding. But yeah, so you can investigate that more if you really want to dive into this wild peony collecting mad person kind of thing.
Yeah, we're looking at the American Peony Society website there. They have a peony registry, and they've got 7,686 results for cultivars that come back. So there's a lot.
And we will get into towards the end of the show. Can you make your own cultivars of peonies? And yes, you can. Just like daylilies or iris, anything like that, you can breed these yourself.
Should we get into the flower forms?
Oh yes, the ones that I have are they're very old fashioned. They're not double flowered, but yes, Ken, tell me about the different flower forms because all I'm growing is the single flower form, which is still very large, beautiful. But yeah, what you got?
Yeah, so the American Peony Society. So this is coming from their website, and we can put a link in the show notes if you want to read this for yourself. Um, so they have, what is it? Six different forms, flower forms that they, I don't know, recognize is the right term, but those are the standard or six forms. So they've got single, Japanese, anemone, bomb, semi-double, and full double. So with the singles, these are more like your wild types. You've got five or more petals. You have pollen-bearing stamens, functional carpels. So they have up to 15 petals, but can still be classified as singles, provided that's kind of a saucer, more of an open type flowers. Japanese, they have stamenoids. These are basically stamens that have been transformed. So they're still like kind of look like singles, but they're a little more, the stamens are a little more petal-like. And then anemone is similar to the Japanese, but those stamens are larger. The stamenoids are larger, look a little more petal-like. And then bomb, the stamens have become petals on there, and they're the same color, or usually the same color as the true petals as well. And then semi-double, they still have prominent stamens in the middle, but they've got more of those petals on the outside. That's a little more full, a little more, I guess, cup-shaped flower than saucer shape. And then full double, that's basically nothing but petals in there. The stamens are all converted into petals and all of that. So if you go to the American Peony Society website, they've got pictures of all of these, which are much better than the crude descriptions I just gave.
Well, I we were at a graduation party a few days ago, and the house as we walked in, they had a semi-double peony, which so that is the one that still has the prominent stamens, which I remember they were yet this kind of very bright yellow stamen appearance right in the middle, and then the petals were this very dark maroon red. It was absolutely gorgeous. Maybe one of my favorite combinations I've seen for a while. Maybe think about more about these different flower shapes. I think I like the semi double the best, just because you still maintain that center. um, color, uh, kind of variation, that might be, it could be a complementary of some of the petals. But I think it helps it stand out more. Now, the full doubles, I can understand why people like those. I mean, they're wild looking. It's just a big ball of flower petals, really. Um, so yeah, the semi double really stood out though to me the other night. Um, so if I would be venturing into the peony world, I'd probably start there and maybe go into some of those like the Japanese flower types or anemone flower types. How about you, Ken? Do you have a favorite?
So the one we have, I got from my grandparents. It's either a bomb or a full double.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's probably full double because it's still got the stamens or no pistils and stuff are still there if you peel back the petals a little bit. Yeah, I think I'm with you. Like if I was picking one, I think I would go more towards that semi double type. I think it looks because some of those stamens have been formed into petals, but you still have those there. Like the contrast, it just looks like it's just a bigger, bulkier looking flower than like the single. It's a little
Hmm.
more, I guess, meat to it. I guess for
Yes.
for lack of a better term. But like usually when I'm looking at peonies, I'm usually more looking for the fragrance.
Hmm.
Like if I'm only gonna have this thing for a week or two, it better smell pretty good.
Yes. I do a lot of stopping to smell the flowers, and especially this time of year, our roses have started to bloom. Um, and again, we didn't plant these roses either. They were there by the previous owner. So, and they're all kind of old fashioned. They smell pretty good. And then, of course, the peonies, I'm stopping like every time I walk by, take a whiff of that because I'm like, oh, it's only going to last for so long.
Yeah, the ones I got from my grandparents, they are incredibly fragrant. I have no idea what the cultivar is. It's just the white. It's
Hmm.
got little pink streaks here and there, but it is at times it's almost overwhelming the fragrance they give off.
Hmm. So, Ken, probably the main question I get about peonies related to, and this is related to blooms, though I don't know if people realize that it's quite related to blooming, is they will call and they'll say my plants, my peonies are covered in ants. What do I need to spray to get the ants off of the peonies? So, what is going on here? Because I see ants on mine all the time and there's never any damage. There's never any problem here. Are the ants hurting my peonies?
Yeah, and I think the alternate to that question is, do the ants are ants required to help the flowers open up? I think is the
Yes.
other the
Hmm.
other side of that coin that you hear a lot. So the ants are they're helping the peonies, but they're not doing anything with the flowers opening up. They're not damaging them anyway. So the peonies and a lot of other plants have extra floral nectaries. So these are parts somewhere on the plant that produce have these glands that are going to produce nectar. In the case of peonies, they've got them on the sepals and stuff on the flower buds. Those are releasing nectar. That's going to draw the ants in. Ants are going to feed on that nectar, and ants are kind of territorial. They're going to defend that food source. So if you have any kind of pest coming in there potentially, or any other kind of insect, they're going to chase them away to protect their food source. They're in a way they're protecting those flower buds by feeding by the peonies are protecting those flower buds by providing those ants with the food source. If you don't have ants on them, flowers are still going to open up just fine. And I think a lot of times when people are cutting them and they've got ants on their flowers, they're concerned. If you're doing it in the marshmallow stage, just swish them around in some water. Same thing with the flowers. They're opened up. Take the cut flower, dunk it in some water, swish it around a little bit. Not so violently that the petals are coming off, but just gently swishing around. Ants will come out, and then you can have your cut flowers. And so usually there's not going to be enough ants on there that even if you did bring a few ants in, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. They probably won't even survive in your house to figure out a way out of your house. So
Yes, they'll have
they
no idea where
dry
you're
up.
at.
Yeah. I did read one of the issues with those extra full nectaries, um, and also that nectar sort of being spread or on that bud as it's beginning to open. If you do not have enough rainfall, if you have like a dry spring, which we have had in years past, the nectar can sometimes make the petals or the sepals stick. to the petals. And so you might not get a complete opening of that flower bed. That's more of an issue for a lot of the cut flower growers that are growing them in like a high tunnel. They're under some type of structure where they're not getting rainfall over top of the plant, washing off that excess nectar, sticky nectar, that might be holding those sepals against those petals. Um, so that was the one issue that I saw, that if you just don't have enough rainfall, or might sometimes be a good idea, spray the top of those flowers sometimes with a mist of water to wash some of that nectar off of there.
Yes, but getting the
Yes,
leaves
there's a
wet.
but. Yes, big but here, because there's some foliar disease issues when it comes to peonies and staying excessively wet. So yes, the but.
Yeah, so with peonies, I think there's probably three diseases we most commonly get. So, botrytis blight, that's the one. Usually, we're seeing this in the spring. It's even more of a cool, wet conditions that it likes. It's if you've got your flower buds, they're developing, all of a sudden they turn kind of black and they or brown and they don't open up. You're starting to get leaf spots on the leaves. That's more than likely botrytis. I know I saw on mine. We've got a bunch of several buds that I think succumbed to it. I don't know how because it's been pretty dry.
Mhm.
Um, and then we've got peony measles, which is another fungal disease. You get the leaf spots. And the botrytis blight and the peony measles can look pretty similar to one another, but you kind of get these reddish spots on the leaves. And the leaf blotch of the measles can get onto the stems and stuff like that. Again, turn kind of brownish over time. And then we've got powdery mildew. So this is, again, warm, humid conditions that are like, so you're getting these white spots on the leaves. And I think powdery mildew is one I think we're seeing a little bit more commonly, or a little more frequently,
Mhm.
becoming a little more common over the last several years. And that could be, I think, if you've got these nice humid conditions, you don't have a lot of airflow through there, that's really good conditions for powdery mildew. If we don't have a lot of rain, that helps powdery mildew as well. If we get a lot of rainfall, that washes that stuff off. It's one of the few diseases that doesn't necessarily like a lot of moisture on the leaves. So, if we're getting drier, you got older plants that have a really thick canopy and stuff, and have a lot of airflow through there. You maybe having pretty good conditions for powdery mildew. Fortunately, with these diseases, though, if you've got healthy, well-established plants, they're probably not gonna they're gonna look ugly, but it's not really gonna affect the overall health of the plant too tremendously. With botrytis, you're gonna lose some flowers, which is the reason we're growing them. But the long-term health, if you've got a healthy, well-established plant, it's not too big of a concern that we're not necessarily getting really worked up over some of these diseases. And you could be pruning out, if you've got a couple leaves that are really badly infected, prune those out, dispose of them. Make sure when you're doing this, it's not wet when you're handling the plants, so you're not spreading those pathogens. You can use fungicides. Again, if you have like botrytis or something, you're doing that early in the season, because the fungicides aren't, once those plant tissues are infected, the fungicide's not going to kill off that. That's still going to be infected. You're basically trying to prevent the spread. So once it's there, you're preventing that, trying to prevent that from spreading instead of kind of curing those infected parts.
Mine get powdery mildew at the end of every year, it seems like. Just towards the end of summer, they get powdery mildew. I do nothing about it. And they come back every year, nice and healthy.
Yeah, and like garden, cleaning up the leaves and stuff at the end of the year, that could help reduce that inoculum
Hmm.
as well. And I don't do a very good job of that, but I still get flowers. They may look a little ragged, especially towards the end of the season, but they're still coming back.
That's right. They're tough plants. That's why they're in everybody's yard from grandparents, or inherited in some form or fashion, that you've gotten them in that way.
Yes. At least in the northern U.S.
Yes. Hmm.
Can't grow them down south. So I think a lot of times, a little tangent here. A lot of times we get zone envy. Like,
Hmm.
they can grow this cool tropical stuff or warmer stuff that requires warmer climate down south, but can't grow peonies, can't grow lilacs, spring blooming bulbs. You know, you got to buy those new every year because they don't have enough chilling
Hmm.
requirement for them. So I think, sometimes in the north we get jealous of some of the stuff they can grow down south, but I think it goes both ways a little bit too.
Yes. Yes. This is not a southern species. This is a good Midwestern and northern US plant. Yeah.
I think it was a zone 7, 8. It's kind of the cutoff where you don't get enough cold temperatures
Yes.
in the winter for it to bloom properly. The plant may grow, but you're not going to get much, if anything, for blooms.
Yeah. Mhm. Well, I guess if you have taken this plant like from a grandparent's house, or if you have a peony and it's not where you want it, I've heard, and Ken and you and I were talking like, oh, people say you can't move these things. I have successfully moved peonies. What methods would be recommended for taking a peony from one spot in the yard and moving it to a different, or taking it from one yard and moving it to a totally different yard?
Yeah, so I think with this, they don't necessarily like their roots getting disturbed a lot. So you want to try to, when you're digging them, get as much of that root ball.
Hmm.
When I dug the ones for my grandparents, I mean, I had a massive root ball, and I don't recommend doing this, but that survived out of the soil in that giant root ball in a basically a garbage can for months before I got it in the ground, and it was a little rough in the beginning, but it survived. I'm not saying you should do this, but I think they're a little hardier than we give them credit for
Hmm.
a lot of times. But yeah, try not to disturb the root system. Get as big of a root ball as you possibly can. The I was reading, those roots are kind of stiff, and sometimes if you get that soil off and let them sit for a little bit, they become a little more pliable, so you're less prone to breaking them if you can do that. Yeah, I think the big thing is doing this in the fall is going to be the best time, and getting as much of that root ball and trying to disturb that as little as possible. If you're going to be moving the entire plant,
Hmm.
if you're going to be dividing it, then you're cutting it up. You're trying to get what was it 4 or 5 as your shoots coming off the sections. So you're going to be cutting it up, and so there's going to be a little more. It gets damage done to the plant, so it may take a little bit of time for that to recover. It may not bloom or your fewer blooms at those first year or two, but then as it gets recovers and gets established, you'll be back to the way it should be, so to speak.
Hmm. You're right. They are tough plants. We bought our house that we are moved into right now. We moved in October. So if there were any peonies around, they got hit by the frost that had already occurred. They were gone, or I just didn't even notice them. And that's because they were growing in the lawn. Like there was several spots just, next spring I saw this peony leaves start coming up. I'm like, well, these are just growing in the lawn. So I think the lawn care company had been mowing that lawn for years before we had owned that house. I think they were just mowing them. Um, and I just saw them growing up in the spring, and I said, well, they are in the middle of the lawn. We're going to try to start to establish a few, beds here, sort of shape or form more of a space as opposed to having flowers growing up in the middle of the lawn, shrubs in the middle of the lawn. I don't want that. Um, and so I dug them up in the spring. We divided them. I think I got like 5 plants, uh, kind of. There was a few clusters of peonies that growing in the lawn, and I sort of divided them and broke them up into 5 separate different plants. I think a few of them, I think maybe 2 of them didn't establish, but the other 3 did establish. And even after I dug them up and divided them, more peony foliage kept coming up in the same spot in the lawn. And so I would dig those up. And so from all of that, I have several in my yard. And also, I tried to do it the best way, try to keep as much soil intact around the roots as I could. Every time I mow, I hit the divots that I've created, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a rough bump right here. I tried to fill it in with soil, but I dug a big hole, and when I dug out those roots.
And I think when you think about it, when the peonies are buying, the most of those are being divided. We've got these nurseries that are growing these peony plants, and that's how they're getting propagated. They're digging these plants and dividing them every few years. From
Mhm.
what I've read, it's easier to divide the younger plants as they get bigger. Sometimes that center starts dying out, like a
Mhm.
lot of other plants, and it becomes more on the periphery. Stuff like the younger plants, that's usually what they're dividing up and then building up their stock. And then once they get enough, then they can sell them. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's in the trade and the commercial level, they're constantly getting dug and divided and moving around and stuff.
Well, and in reading more about peonies, I saw there's a lot of different ways that you can propagate them. There's people that will use leaf cuttings, stem cuttings, you know, and they'll root those in a propagation media, and they'll grow those out. And there's a lot of ways to do this, and you can even grow them from seed, so you can breed your own peonies, and it is kind of an involved process. I don't think it's any more complicated necessarily than doing this with a daylily. But it definitely takes a long time. So if you would say cross pollen with one male, the pollen from one flower, put that on a female flower part of a different flower, you cross those, try to breed different characteristics. It could take you, it could be like 4 to 5 years before you see your first bloom necessarily, and it would take maybe 5 to 7 years before you actually see that plant come into a more mature form. Lots of flowers. What will the leaves really look like? What's the habit of this plant? Do the leaves fall down, or do they stay upright? Are they strong stems? And so this peony breeding is an exercise in patience. Um, so the best way to do this though is, if you are interested in peony breeding, is probably, you know look up. There's a lot of guides online on how to do this. The American Peony Society has a really good guide on how to breed these. Um, and but generally speaking, you would take go from one flower, and you're selecting flowers that you like, or the habit or leaves that you like, and then you go to another female plant, and you're just finding characteristics that you like. A lot of plant breeding starts out as just a guessing, and you don't really have necessarily a big goal in mind, but you're just like, I like this, I like that, let's see if I can get something that resembles both of these characteristics in one plant. So you take the male flower anthers, or the pollen from those, um, and you would then remove all of the petals and all of the male flower parts of that you're going to be pollinating. So the female flower parts, those will remain, and you remove everything off of there, and then you would then, with your finger, or try to brush the anthers onto that female, the ovary, the stigma there, and even if it doesn't seem like it would stick, the pollen's pretty sticky, and it will adhere itself to there. Even if maybe the female flower is not quite ready to receive it, the pollen will stick. And in a few days, everything should line up for both the pollen and the female flower parts. So, and then once you do that, you have to cover that flower with some type of an envelope, mesh bag, anything to prevent pollen from reaching that flower that you don't want to pollinate that flower. The other thing too, so let's say you go to somebody's house, you like their peony, and you have to then transport that pollen somewhere else. It would be recommended that you would store those anthers in like a paper envelope, something that breathes. You could do it in a plastic baggie, but you have to make sure that that pollen can then dry to then be received by the female flower part. So I guess one step that I did forget is, a lot of times breeders will take that pollen, they'll put it on a piece of tin foil, and then they will shine like a incandescent or a condensant light on it that kind of dries it out over the course of a day, and that dries it out, but not using excess heat. And then that pollen is then ready to then go onto that female flower part. So there's and then you just wait, and seeds will develop by the end of the growing season. You'll harvest those, and you can plant those right away as soon as you get those seeds, um, and you can begin to germinate them. But they will grow a root, but they will not grow leaves because they're waiting to go through two um, types of stratification. Again, that warm stratification that gets that root to grow. Then it needs to go through winter that will then trigger that vegetative growth to then ensue. So you're going to be waiting at least a year before you see your first leaf pop up. Um, and then once you see that you have leaves in that next year, you can then pot those up, and then they can, you can grow them out, and have several varieties that, whichever you'd want.
And then if you are doing your own breeding, you'll probably end up tossing, not necessarily tossing, but more often than not, the what you're going to get isn't going to be anything spectacular. I think it's usually kind of few and far between where you'd have something that would be worthwhile trying to propagate out and get more of, at least at a commercial level. If your personal level doesn't really matter, but
And I wanted to share something. So one of our master gardeners, Sue Marshall, she had put together this historic story about a nursery in Macomb called Peonydale. And this is by, again, German immigrants. They had first settled in McDonough County about like, oh, let's see, I can actually find the dates here. Sue did a lot of research on this. They arrived around, let's see, 1840 to 1880. The name of this family was the Wettengals, and so Charles Wettengall immigrated here from Germany. He settled in near Colchester in 1850 and opened a shoe store. They purchased 80 acres of former military tract land, and eventually they owned a whole section, so 160 acres. They eventually purchased near Colchester, which is by Macomb in Western Illinois. And they had six children. And one of these children, his name was Charles. Um, and he was the one who established Peonydale in 1898. He was essentially, as a child, he was just in a curious naturalist. He collected prairie plants. He would go to the woods as he's walking back and forth to school. And he would just collect them and start growing them at his farm. His parents weren't really thrilled with this hobby because they said that um, it distracted from his other schoolwork and chores, but they let him do that. And so uh, at that point in time, peonies were imported quite a bit from Holland and France. Um, and blooms were in high demand. So peonies were, back in the 1800s, were a very popular cut flower. Um, and so nurseries started popping up, these like little ones all throughout, from like the East Coast, moving into the Midwest. So Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, they were pretty big peony growers, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so when Charlie, this young boy, when he was 14, he ordered his first peony from France. It was 1898. Then he started ordering plants from Holland. He held a flower show in 1910, and he made $75 back then, which was a lot of money, for a young boy. Um, and he just continued to buy and cultivate peonies. Eventually he would take wagons of cut flowers from the Combe train station. He'd go all the way into Chicago to sell them. His inventory was so big, so kind of fast forward to 1935, he had 200,000 plants. Um, and by 1955, there was an article that wrote that thousands of people would come visit Peonydale during the growing season. Um, so essentially, Sue, she tracked down some of their descendants. I think they're out in Oklahoma now, but they were really fascinated by the story of, their grandfather and things. And so, they're always looking for these stories. And they found out, that they found some old notes of Charlie's, and he had developed 11 varieties that are registered with the American Peony Society. Um, but there's no pictures of him. There's just his notes and his lists. Um, and so, there was sort of this little movement a few years ago to try to see if we could find any of them. I don't think they really could. But yeah, I have his list right here. And it seems like a lot of peonies are named after people, right? Like there's the
Hmm.
Sarah Bernhardt, the one of the more popular ones, which I for some reason kept thinking of Sandra Bernhardt, the comedian. Like, why would they name a peony after Sandra Bernhardt, the comedian? But it's Sarah Bernhardt. Um, but yeah, some of his varieties are Beacon Light, one named after him, Charles, Clara Stockwell, Georgette, Irma, the Lucy Dunn, the White Filiform, Lothario, the Margaret Veer Heller, Martha V. Lane, Martha I. A. Tideman, Mrs. W. D. Bennett, Mrs. W. L. Miller, the Toreador, Sarah M. Wettengall, which I think was his mother's name. So yeah, those are his 11 registered with the American Peony Society. And it's just, I think small towns in the Midwest have these stories about
Hmm.
this particular plant. So yeah, just a little trip down a little historical lane. And so they actually have a display in our local museum about Peonydale.
So what happened to it?
It's sort of so Sue went to visit this farm, and it just sort of has returned back to the land, so to speak. So there's definitely just peonies growing wild throughout this 160 acres, but it's also grown up in trees, oaks, and hickories, all these other plants that he collected. Um, so Sue said it's beautiful, it's breathtaking, it's stunning, but nobody knows it's there. It's hard to get to now. Um, it's just this old farm that grew thousands and thousands of different types of plants, many of them peonies. Um, and yeah, it's just it. I would love to go visit it right now this time of year.
Field trip.
Let's go. We got to find it first. Sue will give us directions. Um, but yeah, so yeah, that yes, little trip down, looking back. But I think can we, other than the ants, there's another big question that we get is like, why aren't my peonies blooming? Um, we talked about cold. Is that the issue? Is they're just not getting cold enough in the winter?
In the Midwest, probably not. If you're a little further south, that could be an issue. But there's probably, well, there can be multiple reasons as to why. I think some of the more common ones is plants are planted too deep. Those
Mhm.
eyes should only be like an inch or two below the ground. You get too deep, sometimes they're not going to bloom as well. So they may be lifting the plants up, getting too much shade. The beanies we have in our yard, I think that's starting to become a little bit of an issue. They're still producing flowers, but not quite as many as when we first got them in there. Some of the trees nearby are getting bigger, casting more of a shadow. So they are full sun plants. So, and again, they are long lived. So you may have had one that you planted 30 years ago when that tree was really small, not casting a shadow on it. And now it is. So there may be time to
Mhm.
dig that plant and move it. Those are probably the two most common reasons. We talked about like the botrytis um, blight. With that, if that gets in there, that can kill the flower buds. If it's a newer plant and the companies are specializing in peonies, you're going to get ones with plenty of eyes and stuff on it. You're getting real cheap ones from the garden center, something like that. They're coming in a bag. Those may be a little bit smaller, so they just may need time in order to get established, get big enough to really start putting out a lot of flowers and stuff. So small clumps, plants are just getting really big and crowded. They may potentially benefit from being split up too. And I don't think people usually fertilize them much, but maybe if they're next to a lawn and you're dumping a lot of nitrogen fertilizer on there, nitrogen is really going to push that foliage growth a lot of times at the expense of flowering. It's probably not all that common, but I think a potential, especially if you're fertilizing lawn quite a bit nearby. Just I think some of the more common reasons why we may not be seeing flowers and stuff on them.
And that is why we grow them. And so, we're worried about the ants hurting the flowers, or whether the ants are part of the flowers opening, or why aren't they blooming? Um, so I sort of forget about my peonies once they're done blooming. They're still there. I leave the foliage up. Um, but I sort of forget about them. They vanish into the background. Other plants sort of come in and fill the area around there.
And I guess now that we talk about cold weather, if we get a late frost, a hard frost or something, that could nip the buds on you
Mhm.
too. There's not much you can do about that. So
Yeah. Well, that was a lot of great information about peonies, a favorite of mine this time of year. I absolutely love this plant. I'm excited to go back home so I can go watch and see what happens this today. You know, after the rain, they'll perk back up, hopefully, open up, bloom, get a good scent of this kind of that sweet smelling flower that many of us have in our landscapes. And if you don't have it, you know, there we talked about ways you can plant them, divide them, just plant seeds if you can have the patience to wait long enough. Well, the Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by Ken Johnson. And Ken, thanks so much for hanging out, talking about a delightful spring blooming perennial.
yes, thank you. I'm gonna go home and go smell some peonies, and everything will be okay for the rest of the day.
That's right. Yes. We'll just keep the storms away so they don't keep blowing over.
And let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. The horticultural hijinks shall continue on the Good Growing Podcast. Well, listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing. Well, that was a lot of great information about the peonies. Peonies? I think I might have said both over the course of the show. Um, so, yeah, that was what am I talking about? That was, nope. All right. Sorry, McKen. Let me start over. It's getting dark. I think it's going to rain again. Um, take two.